Mr. Bier, you don't know, do you?
I already answered the question.
Well, thank you. That was generous of you. Appreciate that.
Bier mastering acting like a petulant child.
Yeah. Welcome to No Border, No Country. I'm joined again by Judge Matt O'Brien. How you doing, Matt?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Okay, so we had a catastrophic event happen recently in Baltimore. The Francis Scott Key Bridge was struck by a cargo ship, and you would think this is a straight news story. Ship hits bridge collapses, but yet it's emblematic of the time we're living in. Some people are trying to inject their extreme political agendas into this story. Want to take it from there?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. So the one of the research guys at Cato, what's his name again? Refresh my memory.
David J. Bier.
Yeah, Bier and Alex Naurasta is the other one. Neither one of them seem to understand a whole lot about immigration and how it works. But this Bier gentleman decided to put a tweet up. I guess it's now X.
Yeah.
So I guess they're X's instead of tweets. But in any case,
yes.
He X'd and said that migrants were saving American lives because the people from the road crew on the bridge were migrants and they were doing jobs that Americans wouldn't do. Therefore, Americans got saved.
Well, why don't we start with this, Matt? For people that don't know, explain to them what is Cato Institute and what do they stand for?
Well, the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank that kind of takes an economic approach to pretty much everything. And, for certain things like trade policies and tariffs and tax policies and things, this makes a lot of sense and it generally aligns with what conservatives tend to view. With immigration, they've taken this radical market-based view that we should open up the borders and the market will regulate itself. And, this is sort of the libertarian argument for everything. And like I said, in a lot of situations, it really works. However, when you have things where the particular gain or debit to society is not a monetary one or a trade barter-oriented one, then you have problems. And you could, of course, the market will solve every problem. The market will solve the problem of child pornography, but it's not going to do it in a way that any of us are happy with. It's going to do it in a way that exploits children and makes people rich while they're ruining children's lives. So there's a certain point at which this type of crunch the numbers economic analysis just falls apart. Immigration is one of the places where it does that.
So would it be fair to say that they fall in line with this sort of U.S. Chamber of Commerce approach to immigration?
Yeah, for different reasons. I mean, I think that the Chamber of Commerce is primarily interested in getting employers a source of cheap labor. I think the people at Cato really believe that immigration is a market-based problem. Now, it's kind of ironic because one of the individuals who was involved, I believe, in founding Cato was a libertarian economist named Murray Rothbard. And he originally took this market-based view, but he changed later in life. And he said the piece of this that he was missing was, if you think of this in terms of property rights, the United States is the collective property of the citizens of the republic known as the United States. And so illegal aliens are people who are trespassing, and their trespass is no different than as if they trespassed in a private home, because when they enter the U.S. without any kind of permission, what they're doing is they're trespassing on something that we as citizens all own a share of.
Okay. So basically he's the point man on immigration over there. And
yes.
He's been on Capitol Hill several times, which we've got some clips we're going to look at to give you some background on this guy. But so anyway, he references this article on X stating that there were 6 workers on the bridge that night who are missing now and presumed dead because they were on there when it collapsed. He says that they were here illegally. So here's what he said. He said, immigrants likely saved American lives on the Baltimore Bridge by working difficult construction jobs for Americans in the middle of the night. Can't wait to hear Breitbart's report on these hardworking, humble men who are still missing.
Well, since every time he goes up to Congress and testifies, he indicates he's never been near the border, I think if this guy's ever been around an illegal alien, it was somebody who was serving him a cheeseburger at McDonald's. So I'm not sure he knows what he's talking about. But does he know these guys personally? I mean, first of all, we don't know for sure that these guys were migrants. Second of all, we don't know for sure if they were illegal aliens. Third of all, we don't know if they were nice guys or not. I mean, they could have had a criminal record as long as my arm. Nobody knows anything. So he's relying on a just fundamentally weak argument to make a point which is stupid and has continuously been disproven, which is that migrants do jobs that Americans don't want to do. No, migrants do jobs that employers will not pay Americans enough to do. See, part of the economic issue that these people cut out is a good economy relies on rules that set up a market where property rights are respected, and selling your labor in the open market is a property right, and the wage tends to be set effectively by the market until the government gets involved in it, or until people who don't know how to run a business and are losing money start looking for ways to cut corners and get a source of cheap labor. Now, these guys may have been working on the bridge because the benefits handed out so freely during the pandemic took a significant portion of people out of the workforce. So they may have had a shortage in finding people. It may have been an unscrupulous employer, or it may be that these guys have been here in a while and they had a background as an iron worker or an asphalt construction person that other people didn't have. So he's making all kinds of assumptions about who these people were, what job they were doing, and what the significance of it was. And the other thing that I find really mind-boggling is if you brought up based on his testimony that I've seen repeatedly on the Hill, if you brought up the possibility of this being a terrorist action that was undertaken by foreign nationals, he'd go, oh, no. The stats indicate that this is not likely, and the numbers and blah, 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 blah. So it's this unbelievable mixing of metaphors and arguments and presumptions. And it's a dumb point anyways, because nobody wanted to see anybody be hurt or killed on that bridge. And, it's not like these guys intentionally sacrificed themselves so that Americans wouldn't die. They were guys who were the victims of a tragic accident. The fact is that ship weighed something like 95,000 tons, so you're into like the 300 million pound range there. There was no way to stop that. It's not like stopping your bicycle or stopping a car. You can't stop that on a dime. So when the power went out and they couldn't steer the ship, when something that heavy hits a bridge pylon, forget about it. The bridge is going to collapse. And so this is a perfect example of the way the left constantly accuses people of exploiting things like Lake and Riley's murder to push an anti-immigrant agenda. This is a perfect example of how the left comes up with these crazy arguments to push an open borders agenda. And what's even more mind-boggling about it is if you stop and you think about the arguments that are made, whether they're from left, right, or whoever, people that are serious about border security make logical arguments. This argument, there's no logic in this whatsoever. Like, I don't even know how he thought this up. It's just silly.
Well, here at IRLI, we, through our writings and commentaries and things, we have been all over this issue over quite a bit of time, and we've, I would say, utterly debunked this issue that these are jobs Americans just won't do. We reported a while back how there was a meat processing plant in Mississippi that got raided by ICE, and it basically took away all their workers. Shortly thereafter, the company put out an ad in the local paper, and they had hundreds of legal citizens showing up asking to be hired. So this idea that they just won't do that work is not true. And the other thing is, maybe they won't do it, as you referenced, for exploited wages, essentially, doing it for a ridiculously lower wage than is the norm. So, yeah, will they do jobs Americans won't work? Yeah, at those kind of wages when they can be exploited by these employers looking to cut their bottom line on labor costs. But given a fair wage, yeah, the Americans will do those jobs.
A whole bunch of the guys that I worked with at ICE were detailed to go on that raid at those plants down in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. And, the interesting thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is they did searches of the premises in the HR and the managerial offices in preparation for violations of federal wage law cases, criminal cases that were going to be brought against these companies. I don't think the government ever pursued them, but the fact is those companies were also underpaying the migrants by a significant amount. And stop and think about that. That's a form of indentured servitude, slavery, whatever you want to call it. You're undercutting people in the market. You're not providing them with the insurance that you're supposed to provide them. And in a lot of cases, because you're hiring them under the table, they can't apply for workers' compensation if they're harmed. And that's terrible. And I don't get how these anti-borders extremists at places like Cato think that this is a great idea. If all of these people were paying everything that they were supposed to pay and taking care of everything that they were supposed to take care of and didn't have enough workers, then it might make sense to start a guest worker program of some sort. But and the other part of this is that the Cato never wants to acknowledge. They always go, oh, we need immigration reform. We got to update our laws. There aren't enough people that can come here. There's about 3 million people that are given permanent resident status or some kind of semi-permanent employment status here every year, and we make about 1 million, 1.5 million new citizens every year. That dwarfs the migration to any other country in the world. So it's, these arguments are just absurd. And the key thing to remember with those raids at the meat processing plants was when they had no workers and the owners were forced to try and hire Americans, they also had to increase the salary by 3 or 4 times in order to get people to take the jobs. So, what this all comes down to is bad business people who don't know how to run a budget want to make profits off of the backs of foreigners that they are exploiting. And they have convinced the extremist, progressive anti-borders crew that somehow this is a kindness because it gets those people into the United States and out of their countries, which are awful, which that in turn is paternalistic. If you or I were to point out that one of these countries had, social, cultural, political, or economic problems at a cocktail party, the people that hold these extremist views would be all over us for being racist and unwoke and discriminatory and all this other stuff. And yet they do worse than that because they assume, Honduras bad, America good, and that's the only issue to be considered. And the situation is just infinitely more complex than that.
Now, we're talking about the author of this tweet, or X, and we mentioned he's with Cato. So if there's anyone out there who thinks, well, gee, he works for some DC think tank, he must be a really wise, intelligent guy, we've assembled a few clips here that I think the audience will find useful. So can we cue up this first one? This is Congressman Andy Biggs, who is a warrior on this issue, questioning Mr. Bier in a congressional testimony a couple months ago.
And Mr. Bier mastering acting like a petulant child.
Yeah. So let's see what we have here.
Chair recognizes a leader on this issue, Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bier, how many individuals on the terrorist security data set have actually entered the United States since President Biden took office?
A couple hundred.
No. That's the number that we've actually interdicted. How many have come in? Do you know? You don't know, do you? Do you?
I know how many people Border Patrol has arrested.
You don't know how many have entered, though, do you? Come on, let's be honest. I don't know. You don't know.
I don't know.
And you got about 1.9 million, something like that, in known and unknown gotaways.
Yeah, I want Border Patrol.
And you don't know.
You don't know. To go after terrorists.
You don't know how many have come in.
If we let people come into this country legally,
answer the question, Mr. Bier.
I am answering the
question. No, you're not.
If people came into this country legally, we would have a much
Mr. Bier,
more secure border.
Mr. Bier, you don't know, do you?
I already answered the question.
Well, thank you. That was generous of you. Appreciate that. Have you ever been to the border and watched the current process that is gone through to issue a parole status to an illegal immigrant?
I've seen it on video, but no, I've not.
Not been down there, have you?
I've not personally witnessed it.
No, you haven't. Of course not.
I'm not an expert, but I play one on TV.
That it's done on a case-by-case basis. You don't know jack squat about it. You haven't been down there. You haven't been down there.
It is done on a case-by-case basis.
So, Mr. Holman.
That reminds me of there was an old episode of All in the Family, and Meathead was, he was a big social activist guy, and he was meeting with these African-American guys, and he was talking about, he was lecturing them on poverty and all this, and they said to him, what do you know about poverty? And he said, well, I learned about it in sociology class. That's basically the equivalent of what he said right there.
Yeah, I mean, listening to this guy, I spent 30 years working with this stuff, significant portion of my job, particularly when I was at USCIS, but throughout all the jobs I had with INS and with ICE and with CIS, and even as an immigration judge, was to ensure that people who were terrorists, foreign spies, and criminals were not making their way through the immigration system unseen. And so when he's going, oh, well, it was just a few hundred, they have no idea how many people have gotten across the border without being detected. When I was working for the government, there were a couple, a male and a female, who were Serbian war criminals who were found hanging out in, Cleveland or Cincinnati. There were at least 3 Haitians that were wanted human rights abusers, people who had been part of the Haitian government and had been torturing people. There were, I don't know how many people on the terror watch list who were known or suspected terrorists that we found and arrested and expelled. There were cartel leaders that were living here under fake names. I mean, when you have as many people as come into the United States every year, and when I say all the people coming in, I'm not talking about migrants. I'm talking about foreign visitors, the people who come here to do business, the people who come here to take their kids to Disney World. It's like an insane number of millions of people. So if you're the statistical guru that this guy and the folks at Cato are claiming to be, and you do the math correctly, there's going to be a significant number of people that make it through. And as we learned post-September 11th, but we didn't stick to it. If you monitor the flow of those people and you keep as many illegals out as you can, then you minimize the possibility that these folks are going to get in undetected and that they're going to remain undetected for any significant amount of time. But if you just turn a blind eye like this schmuck is advocating, then the bad guys are going to figure that out because they're opportunistic and they're paying attention to stuff like that. And then you're going to wind up with a country full of bad guys. And what is happening now? Every time we turn around, there's a news report about, somebody else on the terror watch list managed to make it into the country. And the list, I mean, you and I have been dealing with this as we've been putting together press releases and op-eds and things for the Lake and Riley murder. I mean, we started doing research and, just off of basic Google searches, you and I found like 10 or 15 instances of major crimes that were committed by illegal aliens, which are by definition a preventable crime, because if that person was not here in violation of the U.S. immigration laws, they would not have been able to victimize Americans. End of story. It's that simple.
So we have more to look at. We have, let's cue up this other one. This is another warrior on this topic, Paulina Luna in Congress,
Yes.
questioning David Bier.
Who I believe is from an immigrant family herself, if I'm not mistaken.
Going back to a statement that Mr. Bier had made, you talk about intentional trauma and that the Trump administration caused intentional trauma by separating these children from their quote-unquote parents. The fact is that, one, you don't know if these people are really... Why are you laughing? Mr. Bier, why are you laughing?
Because you said quote-unquote parents, as if they weren't really their parents.
Okay, so the point that they're arguing about here is the Biden administration was presuming, and has been right along, that anybody who came up and said, hey, we're the guardian or the parent of these kids, is actually the guardian or the parent of the kids. What we found when I was working for the government was that there were a significant number of children who either came to the border with somebody who was not related to them because the child had been rented out as something to misdirect immigration authorities, or they were simply people who were being smuggled across, and they were going to be either put into indentured servitude, sexual slavery, any of these kind of things. So him laughing about this is absurd. And under the Trump administration, actually even before that, going back to Bush 2, the State Department was requiring a lot of these people, when they interacted with the State Department, to have DNA tests in order to prove that they were actually members of the same family. So it's very easy for him to be snarky and laugh about this, but this guy has an awful lot of confidence in his notions of things when he completely has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. The number of cases I worked on where people showed up at the border with somebody who was not just a parent, it was somebody who wasn't related to them at all. Basically bad guys using children as a get into America ticket. So
I'm not
idea.
hold on,
I
I'm
do
not
have
done.
I've
I'm
met
not
with,
done. You have no idea if these people
Okay.
are their intentional parents or not.
Oh, yeah.
You have no
Yeah.
idea. That's exactly why we do family. Really? Are you psychic?
No,
Have you
we
won
do.
the lotto, Mr. Bier? I don't
No.
think you have.
Read the
I'm
Office
not,
of
no, I
Inspector
reclaim
General
my time.
report on family
You have no idea
separation.
what you're doing, and you are
Yeah.
hurting these children. The reason why we want family separation until we can confirm if they
You
are the
want
actual
family
biological
separation?
parents is because these kids are being trafficked. And
as a father,
absolutely, I
that
do.
is
Excuse me, I'm a
frightening.
mother. We can go back and forth, but I'm done talking to you because what you did was destructive. Now, going back to what I just showed you right there, you have no idea if that person or that individual is that parent. Everything that we have just shown you, in this country right now, if you have Netflix, which I'm assuming you do, there's a documentary called Trafficked in America. There's a massive industry in the big ag industry that traffics these kids. They end up on farms. So to sit there and say that that policy doesn't work, you're wrong. Now, I've been covering the last 5 years or so, this entire border debacle. And what I can tell you is if this administration truly cared about immigrants, they would not be having the policies in place that they currently have. It is hurting people. An open border.
I think a couple things were happening there at the same time. When people of Mr. Bier's political persuasion hear the words family separation, that's a triggering thing to them because they buy into that imagery of the children in cages and all, like that fake photo that went out of the child in the cage when he really wasn't. It was a protest. The separation that she was referring to is to determine whether, in fact, that adult with that child is indeed their biological parent, right?
Yeah, this whole issue is loaded. So the first thing I would point out is the only people that are causing family separation are the migrants, because frequently they'll have part of the family stay home and part of the family come here. And just because you decided to show up illegally in the United States, why is it American citizens' responsibility to reunite you with your spouse and children who are in another country at taxpayer expense? That makes no sense. If that was some kind of standard international law rule, my wife and I would be in Paris right now drinking champagne, courtesy of the French taxpayer.
Now, unlike Mr. Bier, I have been to the border several times. I've been at the edge of the Rio Grande and seen the people coming. I've seen masses of humanity coming across. That he could be so naive to think that that's not happening. It's a fact. The people on the ground, the agents on the ground have confirmed this over and over and over. The cartels recycle the children back to the border for another paying client to get across. As you mentioned, there's this whole child trafficking thing going on, and he just assumes, because they say so, that they're the biological parent. How naive can you be?
Apparently pretty naive, judging by him. I don't know what this guy's educational background is, but I'm pretty sure he's never worked in law enforcement or prosecution or national security. I mean, these people who are coming across the border with children are not Joe Average looking for a job. They're using the children as a prop to misdirect law enforcement. By definition, those people are criminals just by doing that. But the reason they're doing that is because they're up to something no good and they don't want to get caught by law enforcement when they're coming over the border. That's why they use the children as, it's like human shields in Palestine, except that there isn't any ordinance involved. It's the same thing. And this whole notion that, you're separating families. No, you are separating people that you don't know and you have had no chance to vet in order to observe them and find out whether the claims that they are making are true. Now, when you're separating these minors from the adults, it's done to protect the minors to make sure they're not traveling with some pedophile or something like that. And I mean, this is basic like cop TV 101. If you watch Law and Order and they start, questioning suspects, if there are two of them that they think might have knowledge, they go to separate interrogation rooms so they can't concoct a story that throws suspicion off of them. I mean, this is very straightforward. And a lot of this comes from the fact that this Bier gentleman does not want to see immigration as any kind of a law enforcement issue. He sees it as something other. Social services, whatever, I'm not sure. But he doesn't want to look at it as law enforcement. All that the Border Patrol is doing and all that the Trump administration was doing is what happens in any kind of law enforcement. If you're driving home tomorrow night drunk as a skunk and you get get pulled over for DUI with a minor in the car, the first thing that's going to happen is the cops are going to take the kid away. End of story. That's what happens.
It reminded me of that scene in Titanic with Billy Zane at the end when the ship's going down. And he grabs the random little girl from steerage and he goes, "She's all I have in the world, please." And then they let him on the boat. I mean, is it really that different?
No, it's not. That's exactly what's happening. That's a good metaphor for it, and that is what's going on. And of course, this guy hasn't been to the border. He's watched it on video. I've been to both the borders, the northern and the southern. I've worked a lot of cases that had to do with both borders, and he's, as my grandmother would say, full of malarkey. He doesn't know what he's talking about. All right, so Brian, who is this coming up?
So our final clip is Congressman Waltz. He's got some visual aids here he's going to show us too, but he's got our hero, Mr. Bier, here, and he's going to dazzle us with his brilliance on this.
Into the country on an expedited basis without being placed in removal proceedings and with little to no vetting and no monitoring and without court dates. So they're essentially just fully released. Florida has sued DHS in federal court, asserting that DHS was ignoring federal law, which they are, and including Secretary Mayorkas is ignoring federal law with this program that requires people entering the country illegally to be detained. So I have up here statements from the judge in Florida, Judge Kent Wetherill, who ordered federal authorities to vacate the parole policy. And he said, for the most part, the evidence establishes that defendants, DHS, have effectively turned the southwest border into a meaningless line in the sand. A little more than a speed bump for aliens flooding into the country. And you can see here where, again, the judge says that essentially these policies have said, come in, we're open, come. So let's talk about the effects on these migrants that we all care about. Let's talk about leading for love, as Mr. Frost from Florida has talked about. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record that Doctors Without Borders, don't take this from me or don't take this as a partisan issue. Doctors Without Borders and international NGOs says 40% of the girls and women making this transit that we've essentially invited them to do are being sexually assaulted and abused. And just a series, again, don't take it from me, a series of articles. Hundreds of sex attacks in the Darien Gap, says Doctors Without Borders. They treated nearly 400 in a week, 1 week alone in 2023. Migrant children sexually abused in, quote, rape tents while crossing the Darien Gap, according to the New York Post. The reality of women en route to the U.S., rapes and no access to hospitals. Again, rape tents and sexual violence towards migrants plague those trying to make the dangerous journey to the U.S. And finally, New York Times, you have to pay with your body the hidden nightmare of sexual violence on immigrants from cartels and gangs. Mr. Bier?
Key point that I think gets lost in this is there are sexual assaults by the cartels and gangs, but there's also sexual assaults on the women by other migrants. Because we have no idea who 99% of these people are, and a lot of them happen to be criminals, as we're finding out all across the United States once they've gotten here. The numbers of sexual assaults in New York City by migrants, who presumably are not cartel members or gang members, are through the roof. And they're having huge problems in the neighborhoods where they've housed a large number of these people, where, local residents are locking up their daughters and women don't want to go out on the street in the daylight because they're worried about getting groped, harassed, and otherwise assaulted by the migrants.
What would you say to I could keep going, to the abuse on these millions? I mean, if you just look at the numbers and do the math, we've got, just in 2 months, DHS released 250,000, enough to fill entire stadiums.
Look, I'm a father.
Do you disagree with the judge that essentially these policies say, come in, we're open, and I'm the father of a daughter too, which is where I think you're going, and how abhorrent this is, that our policies are saying, come, so you can get a job and go in the United States.
I don't want people to have to immigrate illegally. I want them to be able to come legally. Do you want them to be able to come legally? If you don't want them to be able to come legally, Then this is what you're for.
I am for legal immigration,
Okay, so
for
then
orderly
you
immigration.
wanna let them
However,
legally?
you're espousing policies that invite people to come however they can,
No, I want them to come
and
legally.
40% by gangs and by cartels and by smugglers of these poor young girls are forever scarred and abused because of policies that the other side of the aisle and that you are advocating for. And it's disgusting, and it has to stop, and H.R. 2 would put a stop to it. So my friend can call it bigoted if
make
he
it
wants. He
worse.
can throw those ad hominem attacks around.
It would make it
We're
worse.
looking to put a stop to it. Let me just
Because
ask
it
you in my
ends the
remaining
parole
time. My
program.
remaining time. If this were Al-Qaeda and ISIS killing 100,000 Americans a year, more than we lost in Vietnam in 10 years, by pumping in and smuggling in chemicals, would you oppose using military resources to take down Al-Qaeda and ISIS?
I oppose the war on terror, yes. It was a disastrous mistake. It completely disrupted the Middle East and made the problem
For
far
the
worse.
record, Mr. Bier has opposed the war on terror
Yeah.
to keep Americans safe. I think that
If
says
we
it all, my
bomb
friend.
Mexico,
I
it
yield
will
my
make
time.
the problem way
Gentleman
worse.
has yielded. The
It
chair
will
now recognizes
absolutely
from Texas, Mr.
make it the
Kazar
worst.
for 5 minutes.
Bomb Mexico?
Well, I don't think anybody was talking about bombing Mexico. I think the point that the congressman was making was that essentially we are allowing criminal gangs to import poisonous chemicals in the form of fentanyl into the United States. And if it were a terrorist organization attempting to do something similar, people would have an absolute fit and be up in arms about it. But this guy is arguing, Bier, that somehow this is wonderful. But it's the logic, or I should say the illogic, that he's applying to the situation that drives me nuts. It's, well, if people didn't have to immigrate illegally, oh, well, people have to break the law because we're forcing them to do it. No, the laws are there to keep people from immigrating at all and only doing it through the legal system. So what he's saying is, oh, hey, you want to reduce the number of murders annually in New York? Let's just make homicide legal, and then you'll have 0 murders. And as I said before, there's about 3.5 million people that get permanent status or something that's going to turn into permanent status in the United States every year, and about 1.5 million people who become citizens. How many people are we supposed to let in each year if we want to continue to have enough resources, if we want to allow these people to assimilate, and if we want to keep track of who's here so that they're not trying to kill us once they get into the country? I mean, this is just monumentally stupid. If you support policies that secure the border, you're supporting killing these migrants who are coming in violation of the law and entering the country illegally. It's, you know.
He throws out these terms, which I'm sure the anti-borders crowd is focus group tested, that sound great when he says, well, I want a legal system of people to come here. His idea of the legal system is probably a nightmare because it's going to be this jailbreak of everyone in every other country in the world to just bum rush the United States and be granted status. That's not a system. That's anarchy.
It's complete anarchy, and he obviously doesn't know what he's talking about because, one of the things Cato is always complaining about is the number of applications that are backlogged at USCIS. Well, those numbers are backlogged because you have more people applying than are going to be let in. But Harvard doesn't cut down its backlog by saying, well, we got all these people applying. We should just let them all in. I mean, it's just the logic behind that is idiotic. Brian, you're responsible for burglary because you put a lock on your door. You wouldn't be burgled if you just let your door open and let whoever wanted to wander in and take whatever they want. It's your fault.
I want a legal system for people to come into my house, Matt. I'll leave the door open all night and you just walk right in. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's idiotic. And it's, and if you pay attention to what this guy is talking about, he gets pushed, and he's not capable of saying anything. He was up there testifying with Tom Homan, who has a huge amount of experience. When they asked Tom questions, Tom was able to cite chapter and verse and statistics and everything else. When I was up there, they were like, well, what does the president use to shut this down? 1182F. Boom. It's a simple, straightforward answer. He's blah, 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 blah. When I listen to him talk, it sounds like the parents on the Peanuts. because he's saying nothing of any significance because he doesn't know what he's talking about.
You know what I hear when I hear him talking? It reminds me of some arrogant associate professor at college that you had who thinks he's got it all figured out, but it's all theory. He's never really worked in the real world, and he's going to be passionate and fiery and tell you how you're wrong. But what has he done in the real world? Not much.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, I mean, I hate to say this because we work at what is in essence a think tank, but I think that's a problem with some of the think tanks because they pull people who have studied this in an academic environment, which clearly if you're going to be analyzing things, you want people who have, degrees and have learned how to analyze things. But it's also good if you have people that have had some actual real world experience with what they're talking about. And this is not the only hearing where this guy's been asked, have you been to the border? Do you know how this works? Have you ever observed how these are adjudicated? And he always says no, but he knows better. And, when Congresswoman Luna was talking about, or actually it might have been Congressman Biggs, I'm not sure which one of the two, but was talking about the parole authority. And he's going, it's being done on a case-by-case basis. No, it isn't. And he doesn't know what he's talking about because he probably has no idea how parole works. I worked throughout large portions of my career on reviewing paroles that had been granted to see if people needed to be removed, and in some cases doing the background checks connected with parolees. That's doing it on a case-by-case basis. But when the federal government says, well, everybody from Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua that falls into this category is getting parole, that's not a case-by-case basis. Now, generally speaking, most people understand what case-by-case basis is. It's a specific legal thing that has a definition in the statutes. And, I don't know if this guy's got a legal background. I don't know what his background is. I haven't bothered to look it up. I've been so unimpressed with most of the other people that I've dealt with from Cato that I just kind of, when I hear this guy talk, and I should say people that I've dealt with, at Cato on the immigration issue, they're good on some things. But on this particular issue, they just continually seem to pull in people who have no experience with any of this. They haven't been immigration lawyers. They haven't worked for ICE. They haven't worked for CBP. And they just don't know what they're talking about. And they come up with these elegant solutions to problems that don't exist. And the problem that doesn't exist here is we don't have a problem with not enough people getting into the United States. We have a problem with too many people getting into the United States.
Yeah. One thing in response to what you said, Matt, I would personally not consider IRLI a think tank in that we're on the ground, baby. We're winning victories in courtrooms all over the country. We're breaking stories on investigations that no one else is breaking, courtesy of your department. So I would say we are extremely action-oriented. We're not just pushing out position papers.
Yeah, well, I say that only because, the obvious response for somebody who wants to drag us down is go, well, you work at a think tank too.
Right.
And, there's different kinds of entities all over D.C. I don't know that Cato has any real-world litigation or clinical component or anything of that nature. I don't think they do, and I think all they do is produce position papers.
The other thing I was going to say about that clip we just watched, he pulls the I have kids card when he's confronted with the horrors of the child trafficking down there. Okay, you have children, then you should be appalled by what's going on down there. But yet they're able to just look away from those horrors and say, how could you be so mean to these people? You're being mean to them by allowing them to be put into that meat grinder down there.
Well, there's another lesson to be taken from all this, by people who are parents. I mean, he keeps saying, well, I'm a parent, I'm a father. Well, he should know as a father, if you encourage bad behavior, you're a father, what do you get? If you reward bad behavior, you get more bad behavior. If your kids are acting up and you go, that's great, come on, do it again. Daddy's going to give you a reward for breaking the rules. Then they're going to continue to break the rules because the whole thing about the law and, punishment of children that are misbehaving is that there is a disincentive. There's a negative consequence. There's negative reinforcement. And most of us in the United States go out, we drive the speed limit because we don't want to kill anybody. We obey the laws because we don't want to commit crimes. But there's a certain element of every society and certain issues. I mean, the speed limit is one of them. Every single one of us who drives has gotten stuck in traffic behind some buffoon that drives 10 miles under the speed limit, and so you speed up and pass him. And when you're passing him, you're probably going above the speed limit. That's a calculated risk. and maybe you get a ticket for it. Well, most of the people that are coming to the United States see immigration that way because they have not encountered any consequences. So they say, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'll, for 2 or 3 years, I'll be able to live and work in the United States while they get me into a hearing in court. And then, I'll find a free lawyer somewhere and I'll argue about it. And, maybe I spend a decade in the United States, maybe I don't. And then if they throw me out, I'll just come back. Then the current administration has taken and made the situation 110% worse because they've said there aren't going to be any consequences. If you show up and break the law, the federal government is going to become complicit in helping you to break the law. And then they're shocked, Brian, shocked. Reminds me of Casablanca. Shocked. Gambling in Casablanca? They're shocked that what happens, the word gets out in South and Central America, and then everybody's coming here. And then all of a sudden they have Kenyans and Nigerians and Indians and Pakistanis and Chinese coming through the Darien Gap. And why are they doing it? They're doing it because the word's out. And the problem that we have had with immigration enforcement goes back to the 1986 amnesty under Reagan. The 86 amnesty sent a message to the world that if you violate the immigration laws, you will be rewarded, you will come out on top. And so we've had 4 decades since then of people continually violating the immigration laws because they knew they could get away with it.
So in closing, going back to the topic that started this show, we have incidents that happen in this country, like the bridge collapse, is really not an immigration story. And we get people like this who use a tragedy like that, people lost their lives, as a soapbox to get up in there and put in their political agenda. And frankly, it's sickening.
Well, it's sickening and disgusting because it's people exploiting a tragedy for benefit. And it's not people reporting on a tragedy to show the problems that are associated with it, like we have done with the Kate Steinle murder and the Lake and Riley murder. This is people just being ghoulish and trying to pull in things that don't have anything to do with the tragedy itself. So, to the extent that bridge collapse and ship collision are an immigration story, it's that Baltimore happens to be a town that had a lot of immigration, and it worked out well because the Germans and Italians, Irish, and other people that went there assimilated, became Americans, and built a city with one of the largest working ports anywhere in the world, and built it into the city where most of the cars, imports and exports, go in and out of the U.S. It's not an immigrant story because there happen to be some immigrants working on the bridge, because there's immigrants working all over the place. We got immigrants working here at IRLI and FAIR. So that's not shocking. And trying to use that as some kind of thing to connect this, like these guys were superheroes that drew the short straw and said, we'll go out and work on the bridge so Americans don't get killed. It's just idiotic. Thanks for tuning in to the No Border, No Country podcast. You can find us all over the web, particularly at Spotify, on X, and on YouTube. Please tune in, stab the like button, stab the subscribe button, and if you'd like to get more information on IRLI and what we do, you can take a look at www.irli.org, our website, and there's a place there to make a donation if you'd like to support the work that IRLI does.